As Vicar made his way through the dark dungeon, he saw ruby minerals that were scattered throughout the area. He was certain that these veins must be connected to the nearby Red All Mountain. Suddenly, he saw a glimmer of light shining from within the dungeon, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was the entrance he had been searching for. Eager to explore further, he quickened his pace and soon found himself standing in a brightly lit room. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he was struck by the sight of a massive ruby placed on a pillar in the center of the room. He couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the gem, and he realized that it must be infused with mana to produce such a bright glow. However, his moment of awe was interrupted when he spotted a nearby skeleton lying on the ground. As he approached, he noticed signs of violence, including deep stab wounds and dried brown bloodstains. He realized that someone had been here before him, and it had been quite some time since their untimely demise. Curious, Vicar picked up a letter that was lying next to the skeletal remains. The writer of letter began by introducing himself as Cain and explaining that he didn't want to dirty the pure white paper with his name. As Vicar read on, he realized that the handwriting was that of a Baskerville, and he wondered if the writer was a member of that Baskerville family. The letter went on to describe how Cain and his brother Abel had stumbled upon the legendary stone chamber that had been talked about within the family for generations. The two brothers had managed to navigate countless trials and kill many monsters in their quest to reach the chamber. However, the final assignment they found within had tied them there for 3 long years. Vicar couldn't believe the sacrifice they made for the treasure within the dungeon. He wondered what kind of treasure could possibly be worth such a sacrifice. His attention was drawn back to the present as he gazed upon the magnificent ruby at the center of the chamber, realizing that it must be the key to unlocking the final assignment of the dungeon. Vicar read the puzzle on the monument out loud. When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. He couldn't make sense of it, but he remembered reading in the letter that Cain and Abel had also struggled with it. According to the letter, the two brothers had contemplated over the ominous text for a long time before coming to a conclusion. Cain had written that he and Abel were twins who were separated at birth. In order to obtain the treasure of the dungeon, they needed to become one again. That meant only one of them could leave with the treasure. Cain had ended up killing his own brother in a fierce battle, but despite that, there was no change. They had definitely gone from 2 to 1, but Cain couldn't take the treasure. After moments of regret, Cain had decided to leave the place and warn others not to come. He had written in the letter that there was nothing to obtain from this devil's den that only serves to taunt humans. Vicar read the letter carefully as Cain recounted their journey to the dungeon. They had faced countless challenges to get there, but now they were left with nothing. Vicar couldn't help but think about the assignment he had been given, and the fact that it was the same as Cain and Abel's despite the fact that he didn't have a twin. He knew that Cain and Abel had misinterpreted the text, but what did it mean? When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. The words echoed in his mind as he tried to decipher their meaning. Vicar refused to give up. He knew that there was no dungeon that could not be beaten, and he was determined to solve this puzzle. Vicar examined the skeleton carefully and suddenly had a realization. He thought about Cain and Abel's failure and understood that their downfall was their fixed mindset as two individuals. As he walked towards the ruby in the middle of the room, he analyzed the dark passageway leading to a bright stone chamber and realized that the answer to the dungeon was in the riddle. I am one when entering through the dark passageway, but as soon as the ruby's light casts a shadow on me, I become 2. And when darkness re-enters is when the stone chamber's final stage will open. As he broke the ruby, Vicar revealed that the answer was shadow. As Vicar broke the ruby, a sudden flash of light illuminated the room, revealing the treasure that had been hidden in the dungeon. Vicar's eyes widened in amazement as he realized what lay before him was the cause of the two brothers' deaths. Standing in front of him was a sword that emitted an evil aura, placed upon a stone. Vicar was shocked at the sight of the sword and wondered if it was the relic of the Devil's Den. As he examined the sword, his eyes fell upon the text inscribed on the stone beneath it. It stated that only those with Baskerville's blood would be able to take Beelzebub. He was surprised and shocked to learn that the sword Beelzebub originated from this very place. At the mention of sword Beelzebub, his mind raced with memories of a childhood long gone. He recalled a picture book he had seen as a child, which depicted the gluttonous fly Beelzebub, an unprecedented great monster that had invaded the continent in old legends. He remembered that Beelzebub was part of the devil's holy constellation, also known as the Seven Calamities, and that the heads of the 7 families had stepped up to stop them. Vicar recalled that the first Baskerville patriarch had fought Beelzebub, and the remnants of its power had been stored in the lands of Baskerville. The demonic energy of Beelzebub was said to have lured monsters, and although the legend was dismissed by most as a mere myth, Victor knew that it was true. The sword in front of him was proof of that. Victor also recalled that the blade in front of him had been taken by the demon clans, resulting in countless deaths among humans on the battlefield. As Victor tried to pull the sword out, he declared that it would never fall into the demon clan's hands again because it was his now. Suddenly, he felt an energy entering his hand and he exclaimed in surprise. He held the hilt firmly in his hand, and suddenly, the sword disappeared from sight. A moment later, it reappeared, fully fused with Victor's hand. As Victor extended his hand, the sword Beelzebub emerged from it, emitting a faint aura. Victor gazed at the blade with wonder, knowing it was made from the corpse of a devil's holy constellation. He felt lucky to have received such a powerful weapon. With a grin on his face, Victor wondered how much stronger he would become in this life with Beelzebub at his side, and the anticipation filled him with excitement. After exploring the dungeon and realizing that there was nothing else for him to obtain, Victor made the decision to head back. However, as he was leaving, he suddenly felt something strange happening to his body. He fell on his knees, feeling dizzy and hungry. As Victor looked down at his hand, he heard Beelzebub's voice echoing, and Victor realized that it was not he who was hungry, but the sword itself. As Victor walked out of the dungeon, he clutched his stomach with a painful expression. The hunger that had gripped Beelzebub had taken a toll on him, and he wondered if his sense of smell had been heightened as a result. Suddenly, Beelzebub began to pull Victor towards a certain direction, tugging at his hand as if urging him to follow. Victor ran in the direction that the sword was leading him, curious about what he would find. As he reached the location, he saw that it was the corpse of the hellhound that he had killed earlier. Victor was surprised to see that Beelzebub was drawn to the corpse, and he extended the sword towards it. Victor watched as Beelzebub absorbed the blood of the hellhound, feeling his own hunger subside as the sword's voracious appetite was sated. He couldn't help but wonder if Beelzebub's hunger had caused the trees and soil in the nearby mountain to dry up. As he looked down at Beelzebub, Victor felt a sense of responsibility towards the sword and thought to himself, feeling a sense of frustration at Beelzebub's unpredictable nature. Beelzebub finished its meal, making a satisfied sound. Victor watched as the sword's hunger was finally sated, and he took the opportunity to study its abilities. He looked at the slots on the sword and saw that Beelzebub's inherent ability was called Glutton of Flies. Victor knew that this power allowed the sword to absorb the skills of its opponents, making it a formidable weapon in battle. However, the absorption amount was nearly infinite, which meant that countless people had lost their abilities and become obsolete after facing Beelzebub. Victor was aware of the hazardous nature of this power, and he knew that he could only steal up to 3 abilities for the sword. As he examined the first slot on Beelzebub, Victor saw that it was now equipped with the Hemorrhage Hellhound skill, which was rated B+. This skill allowed the sword to constantly pump out the blood of its opponent, even through the smallest of wounds. Victor suddenly got an idea and went to the dead Cerberus's body, with Beelzebub starting its work. However, Victor tried to stop it, saying that it couldn't devour all of it, as he wouldn't be able to explain it during the autopsy if it was too damaged. Victor lightly tapped Beelzebub on his hand and said, "Enough." Beelzebub cried out in pain like a little child. Afterward, Beelzebub now had all 3 slots full: Burn Injury Cerberus A+ rank, Hemorrhage Hellhound B+ rank, and High Speed Regeneration Norvegicus Sewer Rat F rank. Victor was surprised to see the High Speed Regeneration ability, and noticed a dead rat under the Cerberus. He realized that Beelzebub had consumed the sewer rat that was crushed underneath the Cerberus. Victor thought it was a great achievement to have acquired the burn injury skill from the Cerberus, as thermalgia is one of the worst pains a human could experience. It would be much worse than the Hellhound's hemorrhage. Now that they were done preparing the monster to submit for the practical exam, Victor suggested waiting there until it was over. The young hounds had completed their practical examinations and returned to Baskerville, where they eagerly awaited their evaluations. As the evaluations were done, the young hounds received a shield, sword, or necklace as their reward produced from the parts of the monsters the hounds had hunted during their exams. But one young hound who had hunted one particular monster had left a lasting impression on the Baskervilles who were present. Hugo, the patriarch of the Baskerville family, sat in his office, looking surprised as he asked his head butler a question. "Who caught what?" The head butler responded, informing him that Master Victor van Baskerville, an 8-year-old hound, had hunted the Cerberus and a ranking monster who had accidentally crossed over to the restricted area during the practical exam. Hugo was surprised that Victor hunted a high-ranking monster that even the family's guardian knights tended to avoid. The head butler went on to explain that the monster had been wounded by the barbarian tribe and that Master Victor had applied poison to his wooden spear. But there was no further information on what kind of poison it was or how he obtained it. Hugo was intrigued, but the head butler could only report what was written in the hunting journal. He had planned to ask Master Vicar about it, but the young hound had returned to his dorm, stating that he was quite tired. Hugo was amused, remarking that the little brat was already so sly. He believed that information was power, and power was worth something. The head butler couldn't help but express his shock, saying that he was surprised that a hound named Van, rather than Lorelei, was so talented. Hugo responded, saying that he did not discriminate based on a hound's bloodline. He raised hounds based on their talent and spite, not their lineage. This meant that even mutts could come from royal bloodlines. The head butler was left wondering if Hugo was concerned about his second son, who was preparing for isolation training. However, he didn't voice his thoughts aloud and simply apologized. Hugo dismissed his apology, but said that he needed a mood booster, and head butler responded by saying that he will summon Master Vicar. Vicar stood in front of Patriarch Hugo, looking composed and confident. Hugo asked him about his success in catching the Cerberus during his practical exam, and Vicar calmly replied that he had used chocolate on his wooden spear as it was a lethal poison for canid monsters. This surprised Hugo, who then realized the reason why Vicar had asked for chocolate before the hunt. The head butler, who was present in the room, was taken aback by the lack of a proper greeting between the two, wondering if this was really a conversation between a father and son. But the conversation continued, with Hugo asking Vicar why he had not responded properly when the butler had questioned him about the hunt. Vicar explained that the butler was not his master, and when Hugo asked who his master was, Vicar simply said that as he belonged to the clan, the master of the clan was his master as well. Hugo smirked as he congratulated Vicar on his successful hunt, telling him that as a reward, the monster's corpse would be his alone to claim. And as the highest scorer, he had the privilege of making a wish. Vicar's eyes lit up at the opportunity, and he knew exactly what he wanted. With a determined expression, he spoke his wish aloud, requesting access to the 10,000 Epistle Library. 10,000 Epistle Library was one of the largest libraries in the Empire, located deep within the heart of the Baskerville clan. Hugo raised an eyebrow in surprise at the request, reminding Vicar that only the Patriarch and second in command, along with their direct descendants, were permitted to enter the library. Undeterred, Vicar stated that he was willing to give up if it wasn't allowed, but secretly he was already planning to sneak in. To his surprise, however, Hugo granted him permission to enter the library. Vicar was shocked, but it didn't end there. Hugo instructed him to read the Baskerville 6th technique, which was located within the 6th restricted zone deep inside the library. Vicar was taken aback as he heard that Hugo was allowing a child with the Van middle name to read the Baskerville 6th technique. It was unheard of for an illegitimate child to be allowed to go beyond the 4th technique. However, Vicar tried to stay calm and rationalize the situation. After all, it was only the 6th technique. But despite this, Vicar remained determined. He knew that Hugo was currently at the Baskerville 7th technique, and before his regression Hugo was able to bear 9 fangs. But he hadn't forgotten about the discrimination he had faced as an illegitimate child, and he was determined to rise above Hugo's level. His goal was to obtain the greatest essence of Baskerville, the textbook of swordsmanship containing the teachings of the first patriarch who was able to subjugate the 7 great disasters. He knew that this book would be the key to his success, and Hugo will be the one to hand it over to him. As Hugo smiled faintly and wished Vicar good luck, Vicar bowed and thanked him. He knew that Hugo had no idea of the true value of the random book he was handing over, but that didn't matter to Vicar. He was confident that he would make the most of this opportunity and grow stronger beyond everyone's expectations. Vicar arrived at the 10,000 Epistle Library for the first time and gazed around in amazement. As he browsed through the books, he read out their names to himself: severing incisors, grinding molars, piercing canines, snaggletooth that embeds twice, wisdom teeth that lay down, and other books on swordsmanship. These were the books on swordsmanship that he had desperately wanted to learn in his past life. However, Vicar knew that no matter how much mana an illegitimate child of Baskerville had, they could not learn any swordsmanship that was superior to the 4th technique. The Baskerville family had implemented this as a defense mechanism to ensure that the children who became hounds did not bare their teeth towards their master. Vicar eventually arrived at a place where a book was locked with chains with a lock in the middle. He wondered if this was it, the book on the 6th technique. He couldn't believe that Hugo had offered him the book on the 6th technique. Vicar knew that if it was before he regressed, he never would have dreamt of this opportunity. As Vicar unlocked the lock, he thought to himself that of course Hugo had allowed this, thinking that an 8-year-old child wouldn't be able to memorize the contents of the book in a day. But before Vicar's regression, he had already learnt the theory behind the 1st to 4th technique until he got sick of it. He had done this in order to deduce and speculate the theory of the fifth technique. Viktor had a realization that after drawing the fourth tooth, he needed to have stopped the flow of mana. Perhaps that was why he couldn't make the fifth tooth. The Baskerville swordsmanship had a unique trait where, depending on the stage of the sword, it's one tooth for the first technique, two teeth for the second, and so on. And when you draw teeth, a special trait, a red sword energy, appears. Despite getting a chance to read the book on the sixth technique, Viktor didn't care about it. He had come to the 10,000 epistle library for a different reason, to find a stage that was higher than the one he was currently at. Viktor walked out of the swordsmanship books section of the library, catching the guards by surprise. They questioned him in disbelief that was he done reading books already. The guards offered to get him more books, mentioning that there were other swordsmanship books deep within the library. But Viktor declined and assured them that he had finished what he came for. The guards were amazed that Viktor was done so quickly and suggested that he stay longer to browse other books. Viktor assured them and said that he was thinking of reading other books before leaving. As Viktor walked away, the guards began whispering amongst themselves, commenting that the section Viktor was going to was filled with miscellaneous books. One of the guards suggested that if it were him, he would read about the textbooks on swordsmanship that were deep within the library. He wondered if Viktor didn't know their worth because he was young. Viktor overheard their conversation and thought to himself that he would leave them to their thoughts. He knew that among the dusty miscellaneous books lay a hidden treasure. As Viktor looked around the library, suddenly his eyes lit up as he spotted a book titled A Lurking Ambush. He reached for it and held it in his hands, knowing that it was the book he had been searching for. He examined it and noted that it was a useless miscellaneous book with ripped pages, but he knew its true worth. He remembered a time before his regression when he was affiliated with the Hound squad. They had found a single ripped page from a swordsmanship textbook with Baskerville's handwriting on it. Hugo, who was obsessed with finding the book that matched the page, had scoured the entire library and finally found it in A Lurking Ambush. The book contained the Baskerville ancestors' writings, including the 10th technique that Hugo had gone crazy over. He had sent hounds to the 7 great families to obtain the remaining 6 pages, even declaring war on those who refused. After the sacrifice of many hounds, all the missing pages were given to Hugo. But in the end, the only reward he received was a simple word, "good job." Because of this, Hugo had broken through the 7th technique and achieved the 9th technique, but it came at a terrible cost. Under him was a pile of wasted hound corpses and blood. Viktor's eyes narrowed with anger as he recalled this memory and said that it was a stupid life. He knew he could not let it happen again. Viktor remembered all the contents of those missing pages and realized that the only reason he couldn't progress beyond the 4th technique was that he had no access to the original book. He knew that those missing pages held the key to mastering the techniques. Without them, the book was nothing but a collection of random and useless techniques. After reading the book for a while, he said aloud that if other people read this book, it would seem like a miscellaneous book that didn't make any sense. But the moment you use the missing pages and fill in the blanks, the false and misleading information turns into an amazing masterpiece of a book. Viktor had reached the highest level of Graduator Aura and the highest level of the 4th technique before he regressed. He knew he could do it again, but this time, he wouldn't make the same mistake. He made a vow to himself that before he turned 15, he would reclaim the power he had lost. Viktor was deeply engrossed in reading the book, and time seemed to pass quickly. When he finally closed the book, he realized that the night had turned into day. He was amazed at how much he had achieved during this time and felt proud of himself for memorizing the entire book's contents. As Viktor stood up, he took notice of his surroundings and realized that the Guardian Knights were nowhere to be seen. He knew that he could not draw 10 teeth with a young body, but he was confident that currently he had the potential to achieve the 5th technique that he couldn't reach in his previous life. Viktor entered a focused and determined state with the statue before him. He began to strike it with his Baskerville sword technique, unleashing his full power with each attack. First, he executed the 1st technique, then the 2nd technique, followed by the 3rd technique, and finally, the 4th technique. As he fought, memories of his past flooded his mind. He remembered how hard he had worked to obtain the highest level of Graduator Aura in his previous life, but he couldn't learn a suitable sword technique, and only met with hostility from the people of the direct bloodline because he was an illegitimate child, and that was also the reason why he could not go beyond the 5th technique. But this time, Viktor was determined not to let his past hold him back. He attacked the statue with all his might, channeling his anger and frustration into his sword strikes. In the midst of his attacks, Viktor's thoughts turned defiant. With a vivid image of Hugo's face on the statue in front of him, he unleashed his technique, cutting through the statue with precision. Victor breathed heavily and wondered if he was able to execute the fifth technique. He clenched his hands and smiled as he felt a hot sensation rise from his heart to his neck. He was overwhelmed with happiness to the point that he could cry. Suddenly, he realized that he needed a sword to test his newly learned technique. At that moment, at a record-breaking speed in Baskerville's history, a young hound's canine teeth started to grow that were bared towards its master. Victor beamed with pride, his body still trembling with excitement from his success in drawing the fifth tooth. He couldn't believe how far he had come, and how quickly he had managed to do it. He marveled at the strength of his mana, now able to support him at a level he had only achieved after years of hard work in his previous life. As he looked at the liquid aura flowing within him, a sign of his newfound status as a graduator, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Graduators were on a completely different level from sword experts, and he was now one of them. It was a point that had taken him 30 years to reach in his previous life, and yet here he was, only 8 years old. The solid aura within him had transformed into a liquid state, with increased density that allowed him to use it more freely. Victor felt confident about his new skills and abilities, and he knew that he could achieve much more. He was determined to master the lurking ambush sword technique and use it to its full potential. He realized that with this technique, he could smoothly transition between offense and defense, making it the perfect technique with no limitations. Victor carefully placed the book near the window and took a moment to reflect on his progress. He knew that he had come a long way since his regression, and he was now stronger and more skilled than ever before. He felt that he could challenge a mid-class graduator if he put his mind to it, and he was confident that he could win using his new skills. However, Victor also knew that he couldn't reveal too much of his strength to Hugo. He needed to give Hugo something to look forward to, so he had enough time to take everything he needed. Victor took out a magnifying lens and placed it carefully near the book. The sun's rays converged onto the pages of the book through the lens, and a little fire started burning it. With an evil grin, Victor commented that the destruction of the book would make it difficult for Hugo and the hounds to reach the 10th technique, although Victor himself would have no such difficulty. Suddenly, the guards, who had been nowhere to be seen, arrived in the library. The smell of burning paper had caught their attention. They were startled to see Victor there and demanded to know what had happened. Victor's expression quickly changed to one of apology, and he explained that he had accidentally left the magnifying glass around, which had caused the fire. He offered to inform the butlers of the incident. The guards knew that they could be punished heavily for this, and after a brief pause, one of them spoke up that this was not something that he needed to apologize for. It was their fault for not looking after him properly, and they were just glad that this was an area with only useless books. Victor asked if they were busy with the Moore clan regarding the ruby mines. He thought they wouldn't have time to deal with small problems like this, especially since they weren't even there to begin with. The guards agreed to keep it a secret, as long as Victor was willing to do the same. As he started walking away, Victor suggested they keep the incident between themselves, and he apologized for taking up their time. As Victor walked away, the guards spoke to each other about how nice and considerate he was towards the workers. They believed he deserved to be respected. Little did they know, Victor had a mischievous grin on his face as he left them behind. As Victor stood in Hugo's office, Hugo asked him if he had learned something enlightening in the library. Victor responded that he had learned of something warm and sharp, yet soft and viscous. This statement shocked both Hugo and the head butler, who realized that Victor might have achieved the aura. Aura was a sign of officially entering the world of the sword. Even geniuses must train without rest until the age of 15 to reach the level of low-class sword expert. Hugo was excited, but then realized that Victor was only 8 years old and denied the thought of Victor reaching that level. He then asked Victor if he could show his father what he had learned, to which Victor responded affirmatively. In the Colosseum-like structure, Victor stood with a sword in his hand as many young hounds watched with confused looks on their faces. Head butler asked Hugo how he planned on testing Victor's skills, to which Hugo replied that he was going to release a monster for Victor to deal with. Head butler was shocked at the idea of releasing a monster, and Hugo confirmed that he had prepared a hungry and feisty one. The gate in front of Victor opened and a guard brought in the chained orc. The orc was a massive, green-skinned creature with bulging muscles and razor-sharp tusks protruding from its mouth. Its beady eyes darted around the Colosseum, sizing up its opponents. The young hounds in the audience looked on in shock and awe at the sight of the fearsome creature. Some whispered to each other in disbelief, questioning whether it was really necessary to send an orc to face an 8-year-old. They wondered if the Guardian Knights would have to intervene if things got out of hand. Despite the audience's doubts, Victor remained calm and collected, ready to face the orc with his sword. Hugo gave permission and the guard opened the orc's chains. The orc let out a loud roar and charged towards Vikir. However, Vikir remained calm and waited for the right moment to strike. As the orc approached him, Vikir swung his sword with lightning speed, cutting off the orc's arm in a swift motion. The audience, as well as the orc, were shocked by Vikir's sudden display of strength. But Vikir didn't waste any time and quickly swung his sword again, cutting off the orc's leg cleanly. The orc fell to the ground, growling in pain. Vikir, on the other hand, remained composed and analyzed the situation. He realized that the orc must be surprised that it was bleeding for the first time and that its distinctive skill, high-speed regeneration, won't activate either. Vikir knew that C-class monsters won't be able to stop the hemorrhage caused by a B-class hellhound. The audience was in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. They couldn't believe that an 8-year-old could be that strong. Some wondered if it was even possible to do that without collecting mana. Vikir looked at Hugo, but the latter's face remained calm and collected, and no expression could be seen on his face. Vikir knew that Hugo was still trying to determine what he had learned inside the library, and decided to show him what he wanted to see. Suddenly, Hugo's eyes began to glow, and the head butler exclaimed in shock, questioning if that was Aura Blade. Vikir's sword began to glow with a bright red light as he charged towards the orc, who was attempting to stand up. With a swift strike, the Aura Blade sliced through the air and blasted off the orc's head. Hugo, who was seated on a nearby chair, couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The head butler immediately recognized the glow emanating from Vikir's sword as the aura of a low-class sword expert. He congratulated Hugo, exclaiming that they had just witnessed the birth of a genius, and that there would never be another like him in all the families of the Empire. However, Hugo's attention was drawn to the orc's blood, which continued to flow despite its reputation for rapid regeneration. He told the head butler that Vikir had only won because the orc was weak. But just then, Vikir's voice reached Hugo's ears, and he turned to face his son. With an innocent smile on his face, Vikir asked, "Is there anything stronger than this orc?" The audience, filled with young hounds, was surprised when Vikir requested a new and stronger opponent. Vikir had his own motivations for wanting to face a stronger opponent. He hoped to impress his father, Hugo, and demonstrate his progress in front of the audience. He believed that by doing so, he could be acknowledged and possibly separated from his father, like being dispatched to a remote area or admitted to an academy. Hugo, who was watching from the sidelines, commented that the orcs he had brought in from afar were not enough to satisfy his son's hunger. He agreed with Vikir and suggested that he should be facing more challenging opponents at his age. He turned to his head butler and asked him if there was a creature they had captured during a barbarian raid for experimentation. The head butler confirmed that there was just one creature left, and Hugo ordered for it to be brought in. Vikir and the audience were surprised as they watched a troll being led into the arena. Vikir stood in the arena, facing a fearsome troll that was twice his size. Vikir asked for Hugo approval to start the fight, and as Hugo gave his approval, the troll's chains were released, and it lunged at Vikir with a powerful punch. But Vikir was quick and agile, and he managed to dodge the attack with ease. He swiftly moved behind the troll, taking advantage of its momentary confusion. In the audience, someone exclaimed that this was the perfect moment to attack and questioned why did Vikir missed it. Hugo, on the other hand, nodded and explained that trolls had excellent regenerative power, so only fatal attacks were worth it. And that's why a plan was needed in order to hunt a troll. As the troll charged towards Vikir, he gracefully dodged each of its attacks with ease. The audience watched in amazement as they saw Vikir evading the troll's attacks effortlessly. However, they couldn't help but wonder why Vikir wasn't fighting back. They speculated that maybe he was trying to tire the troll out or that he was a genius who had a plan up his sleeve. After a while, Vikir realized that the fight was becoming tedious and decided to take action. He knew that if he used his full strength, he could easily kill the troll, but that would put him in a tough spot. He needed to make it seem plausible, and so he decided to use the troll's power against it. As the troll attacked again, Vikir seized the opportunity and swiftly attacked its arm, almost detaching it from the troll's shoulder. The audience gasped in amazement as they saw Vikir's quick and decisive move. They thought he had slayed the troll, but they soon realized that it would recover in an instant unless the wound was fatal. The troll's wounds began to heal at an alarming rate. Vikir realized that the only way to kill it was with Beelzebub's hemorrhage skill. However, he also knew that using such a technique would be meaningless. Hugo advised Vikir to stop before things got out of hand, but Vikir ignored the advice and replied that he was almost done. He continued and told that he was near an epiphany, and if he could not kill Troll with his next attack, he will give up. As the troll growled menacingly at Vikir, he couldn't help but ponder over how much of his true power he should reveal. He knew that he had already decided on an answer, He wanted to show a scenario where he had leveled up from an epiphany during the fight. However, he was also curious to see how Hugo would react to this. His sword glowed red as he prepared for a powerful attack. As his sword struck the troll's head, it was cleanly sliced off without any resistance. Everyone, including the head butler and the audience, was shocked by what they had just witnessed. It was unprecedented for an 8-year-old to achieve the second technique of the Baskerville clan, which was normally attained at 18 years of age. Vicar was overjoyed by his victory and had an innocent smile on his face as he declared that he had done it. However, Hugo was left in shock and couldn't believe what he had just seen. A week had passed since Vicar's impressive display of power against the troll, and he found himself sitting in the Baskerville clan's dining area, staring down at a bowl of unappetizing miscellaneous meat porridge. While eating his food, Vicar noticed that everyone was avoiding him, which didn't come as a surprise to him since power was everything in their family. But he was pleased when he saw that even Hugo was taken aback by his recent display of power. Vicar reflected on what he had revealed about himself so far, including his Baskerville second technique and mid-rank sword expertise. However, he also knew the truth that he was in fact a low-rank graduator who could weakly perform the Baskerville fifth technique. With the skill he obtained from the troll, he believed he was now stronger than the average graduator. He then remembered that he had been eating a lot more since obtaining the skill for Beelzebub's third slot, which now had a super speed regeneration troll with a C+ rating. Suddenly, the triplets appeared behind Vicar, causing him to be surprised and cautious. He thought to himself that he didn't want to deal with them again, so he turned back to his food and resumed eating. The triplets quickly explained that they just wanted to tell him that he was so cool when he defeated Cerberus and the troll. Vicar was so surprised that he spat out his porridge. The triplets asked him if he was okay, but Vicar was suspicious of their motives. He thought to himself that it might be some kind of two-faced technique or deceitful policy. He considered beating them up before thinking about it more, but before he could act, the head butler, Barrymore, appeared behind him and called out his name. Vicar was surprised to see him and wondered why he was here. Barrymore then informed him that he should hurry to the Patriarch room, and Vicar wondered why Hugo had summoned him. In Baskerville clan's Patriarch office, Patriarch Hugo sat on his chair as someone entered and greeted him. It was Morgue clan Patriarch by proxy Adolf Morgue. Hugo acknowledged that it had been a while, and Adolf noted that he hoped the annual event would go smoothly. Hugo assured him that the joint training had always gone without a hitch. Adolf brought up the incident from last year when 2 children were seriously injured, one from each family. Hugo tried to downplay it, saying it was but a scratch and that Morgue's children seemed to be quite dramatic. Adolf retorted that it was because the Morgues were noble and dignified. The Baskervilles and the Morgues were once on good terms as they were a renowned mage clan and iron-blooded sword clan respectively. The past emperor had once said that magic and swords are a complementary pair, and because of this they began joint training sessions for children between the ages of 8 and 15, which was carried out annually in a good atmosphere. However, a problem arose when a ruby mine was discovered between their territories, and blood was spilt over the conflict. As a result, the 2 patriarchs came to be on bad terms, but they had to continue with the joint training as per the Emperor's command. Adolf had come in his brother's stead to ensure that the event went smoothly. Adolf mentioned to Hugo that he had heard news about a supernova appearing in the Baskerville family, which was a great blessing to the Empire. He explained that a rare genius, who was perhaps only born once a century, had been born to the Baskervilles. However, Hugo responded with pride, saying that it was not that big of a deal. Adolf noticed Hugo's reaction and was surprised that Hugo actually received the compliment. But then, Adolf mentioned that the Morgues also had a genius in their hands and called for his sister's daughter, Camus, to come into the room. Camus, a girl with red hair, entered the room and Adolf introduced her to Hugo as Rispani's daughter. Adolf turned to Camus and asked her if she was going to greet the Patriarch. But instead of answering the question, Camus accused Hugo for being the thief who stole their ruby mine and demanded that he give it back. This accusation didn't sit well with Hugo, who gave Adolf an angry stare and questioned the accusation. Camus then explained that Adolf had referred to the annoying chin beard as the thief who stole the ruby mine. Adolf denied ever saying such a thing, but Camus insisted that he had said it an hour and 42 minutes ago, right before getting off the carriage. Hugo, still trying to control his anger, asked for clarification, but Adolf tried to defuse the situation by suggesting that there was a misunderstanding. However, Hugo said that there was no need for Adolf to explain the Morgue clan's problems with children's education to him. Camus persisted in her demand for her rubies to be returned, complaining that she couldn't even do research without them. Adolf tried to calm her down by calling out her name, but to no avail. Hugo was losing his patience and commented in anger that it seemed like the morgues didn't teach manners at all. Adolf defended Camus, questioning what Hugo planned on doing to a child and if he was threatening an 8-year-old girl. This left Hugo speechless as he couldn't bring himself to act in such a way that would hurt his pride. Suddenly, a new voice entered the room, remarking that the morgues don't teach their children not to envy what belongs to others. The speaker of this voice was none other than Vikir, and the head butler informed Hugo that he had brought the young master. Adolf was taken aback by the sudden appearance of Vikir and couldn't help but wonder if he was the Baskerville supernova. However, his thoughts were interrupted when he realized that Camus, who was sitting right next to him, had disappeared. Camus, on the other hand, had approached Vikir and demanded to know what he had just said. Adolf called out her name, trying to stop her from causing a scene. Meanwhile, Vikir was analyzing Camus, wondering if she was the Morgue clan's iron-blooded empress, Camus Morgue. Vikir recalled Camus' reputation as the genius of geniuses within the Morgue clan, who had raised countless great mages. At her peak, she had killed all the monsters and barbarians in the Le Rouge et Le Noir mountain by herself, burning them to death on spears and creating the famous border of blood and ashes. In addition, her beauty was captivating, and she was able to manipulate even the imperial family. As a result, she was called the Fire Goddess of Authority. Vikir noted that this was all in the far future and that she was just a child right now. Camus interrupted Vikir's thoughts and aggressively questioned why the ruby mine belonged to Vikir. Vikir remained calm and collected, even going as far as to call Camus out on throwing a tantrum. Camus then began to cast a spell, but instead of attacking, she created an ice sculpture to illustrate her point. Vikir was surprised by Camus's use of spell as an ice sculpture instead of an attack, as was expecting a fight to break out between the two. As Camus pointed to her creation and began to explain, Camus pointed to a nearby cave and began to explain the situation regarding the ruby mine. She stated that the mine was situated on the border between Morgue and Baskerville territories and was called the Joint Security Area. Camus continued, saying that while the entrance to the mine was on Morgue territory, the mine itself ran underneath Baskerville territory, preventing the Baskervilles from claiming it all for themselves. Camus emphasized that the ruby mineral vein belonged to the Morgue clan, but the Baskervilles were claiming that it was trespassing and interrupting their mining activities. Camus further explained that the Morgues had offered to pay rent for the territory, but the Baskervilles had rejected the offer. Adolf seemed pleased with this explanation, but Hugo was becoming annoyed with the situation. Vikir then mentioned that rubies were commonly used for magic ingredients and that the Baskervilles didn't need to mine them. However, he also pointed out that it was unfortunate that the Baskervilles weren't fools who would open their territories just for few pennies. Camus was surprised and confused by this statement, pointing out that if the Baskervilles didn't need rubies, then why not rent their land? Vikir explained that the Baskervilles were only interested in their land and didn't want anyone else to profit from it. He warned Camus not to come into their territory, as they were the only ones who would lose out in the situation. Camus, however, was not satisfied with this explanation and decided to take matters into her own hands. She claimed that she had possession over the ruby mineral vein, and she placed her arm over the sculpture in the Baskerville territory, asking whose arm it was. Vikir caught her arm and responded with a smile, saying that it was his arm, as it was in his land. Camus felt her face flush with embarrassment as Vikir's words made her feel flustered. She couldn't believe what she was hearing and responded with a stutter, asking him what was he talking about. How could she belong to him? Vikir, who seemed amused by Camus's reaction, replied with a mischievous grin, "Who said you're mine?" Camus was confused by Vikir's response, and suddenly, Vikir pulled out a knife from his back, which surprised not only Camus but also Adolf and the head butler. Vikir's evil grin sent chills down everyone's spine as he said, "I'm saying your arm's mine." Camus was taken aback by Vikir's sudden change in demeanor and said in a shaky voice, "What?" Hugo, who was sitting nearby, was sweating profusely, and the only sound that could be heard in the room was a hiccup. Thanks for watching the video. The next part will be added here once it's uploaded. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to my channel. Also, don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you're always the first to know when I post something new.